With that, we go to the ranking member, Mr. Johnson, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For many years, the American judicial system has been a shining light of fairness and impartiality to the world, a system independent from undue influences or of the other branches, with checks and balances that promote accountability. Professor DeLille, can you please walk me through some of the specific attributes in the U.S. judicial system that, broadly speaking, make it a fairer venue to resolve disputes compared to the Chinese court system?
Could you turn your mic on, please?
I'm sorry. There are, the contrasts are quite strong. The U.S. judicial system is, of course, open to pretty much anyone who has a cognizable claim, who has a claim that is covered by U.S. civil law, regardless of national origin, regardless of perhaps the motives behind the lawsuit. And U.S. courts have historically been quite insulated from political pressure. Of course, in every system, there is some link between politics and courts. Courts apply the laws adopted by political bodies, Congress in our case. And judges, of course, are selected even in our system by political processes. But the contrasts remain profound. One of the unfortunate developments in China in recent years has been a ratcheting up of the position that courts should take into account party policy and national interests and should be accountable to the party, should be subject to various forms of towing the line, as it were.
Well, let me stop you right there, because now we're starting to see some blending. Unfortunately, many of our judges have been under vicious attack from our executive branch and MAGA-loving members of Congress. When judges make a ruling Donald Trump doesn't like, our felon-in-chief takes to social media and he bashes and slanders that judge in a way that often leads to threats of violence from Trump's base. At the same time, his cronies in Congress race to file articles of impeachment against that judge without a legitimate shred of evidence of a crime, a high crime, or a misdemeanor. Professor DeLille, you were speaking about the unique qualities of the judicial system of the United States that make it among the fairest systems in the world. But if we keep politicizing our courts, like threatening to punish or fanning the flames of violence against judges who dare rule against President Trump or his interest, how could this impact the impartiality and dependability of our courts in the long term?
That obviously is a concern. I've spent a great deal of time watching Chinese courts for the last 30 or 40 years, and I have seen progress and backward motion on this issue, and the form in which the erosion of the shoots of judicial independence and fair-mindedness of Chinese courts, and here the accomplishments were quite impressive for several decades, have been under threat because of the demand that courts take political concerns more directly into account. At one point, the president of the Supreme People's Court in China several years ago said that party policy was one of the principles, along with law, that should decide cases. We've seen judges face lifetime responsibility for so-called erroneous decisions. And we've also seen populist pressures on courts, people in the streets expressing opposition to the way courts are ruling. Those are the hallmarks of threats to court independence and judicial independence. Stepping outside my lane as a Chinese law expert here, there are things that look to me disturbingly familiar going on in the United States.
Thank you. Some proposals I've heard from my colleagues during my tenure on this committee would diminish access to the U.S. court system, putting logistical and huge financial barriers in place for folks for trying to bring a lawsuit. This would mean effectively that only the wealthy or the well-connected could fully take advantage of our judicial system to resolve their disputes, and the little guys would be left behind. Professor DeLille, you are an expert in the civil justice system. Is it a good idea to make this system harder or exponentially more expensive to access? And if we start mandating that anyone who wants to bring a suit has to pay exorbitant fees to get in the door, how could that impact our impartial system of justice in this country?
I see my time has expired. May I answer?
Of course.
I mean, I think a cornerstone of the U.S. judicial system is fair access to justice. You should be able to go to court if you have a legitimate claim, and that applies to Chinese parties as well as U.S. parties. We've talked about how to screen that out. And I think there are many things either in the form of fees or in the form of creating barriers where you must prove the legitimacy of your claim. We talk about some of the disclosure requirements, which could chill and impede access. One of the things I think that U.S. courts, as I mentioned earlier, could do to deal with problematic issues from China is to take measures to dismiss claims before they proceed to a point of being highly burdensome to parties. I would advocate that we look at that stage rather than closing off litigants wherever they're from before they can get through the courthouse door.
Thank you, and I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. If I could ask your indulgence for just one clarification. Professor, you mentioned political pressures and the nature in both countries. Briefly, can you simply say, is there any real comparison between our lifetime appointment federal judges and their likelihood to rule against the politics that may have gotten them the job and the Chinese government broadly?
I'm not sure there's a simple answer to that question. These are obviously matters of degree. I don't think either system exists at a complete pole. As I suggested earlier, there had been welcome signs of progress in China, and there's been some but not complete backsliding. And I don't think, in my personal opinion, the U.S. Is where it has been or should be. And I think judges are human beings, and they worry about the way they are addressed and discussed by the politically powerful. I think that's probably something of a universal. I've certainly seen it in China.
Thank you.